All right. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Forbes, Dr. Canada, and maybe Dr. Coopwood will find his way into the meeting at some point. But thanks, everybody, for joining us. Really excited to have this panel. We've been working on this, what I'll call Money and Medicine initiative for quite some time. Had a little bit of fun this past Saturday night, recognizing Robert Frederick for his leadership with the group, and happy to see Dean, Christian, and Jessica carrying the torch forward for the group as well. So if everybody's ready, I'm just going to jump right into the questions. Dr. Forbes, I'm going to go to you first. Sure. Feel free to give any background about yourself before you answer the question, but could you talk to us a little bit about the different administrative positions you've held as a physician, and maybe talk a little bit about how physicians can be effective in those roles?
Sure, absolutely. Happy to, and glad to be here tonight. First of all, just let me correct one thing. My title is a little bit unusual. It's an executive vice president over what we call the academic group. I am essentially a chief operating officer over about 80% of the operations for Methodist LeBonheur Healthcare. I oversee hospitals, service lines, physician enterprise, etc. So it's a very operational function. And that's not where my career started, though. I am a family physician by background, came out of residency, started my own practice, grew it to a group practice, and also started PHOs and IPAs and other things. And that's really how I ended up in a leadership role outside of my former clinical practice. And I often joke and call myself the accidental physician executive, because none of us go to medical school thinking someday I'm going to grow up and be a heck of a physician executive. You know, we often think we're going to be the best clinician we can possibly be. And there's times that our talents are needed for other things as well. And so for me, not only did I start off with starting my own practice and having to understand the business functions of running a practice, growing it in a very competitive market, which was Cleveland, Ohio. And I had the Cleveland Clinic and University Hospitals all trying to do different things. And we were trying to survive that strategy. I also served as a chair of family medicine, and then ultimately a medical director of one of our sites. And my journey just blossomed from there, where I've served as both a chief medical officer and a chief operating officer for smaller organizations, very large systems. I've been a CEO of a physician enterprise and an executive vice president out in Texas over an academic organization, one of the universities of Texas. And so I've done a lot of things in my career. This particular position really combined a lot of the things that I had been through with my experiences as both a clinician, but certainly in all my leadership roles. And that's what appealed to me to take this job at Methodist LeBonheur, because I do have academics that falls under me. So GME and UGME and our academic relationships and partnerships as well. And, you know, it balances quality, safety, and clinical outcomes, and then truly the business functions of what we do as an organization. And, you know, to Clint's question, you have all these different hats that you wear. You get an opportunity such as what I'm in right now, where I bring it all together. You know, I think there's a lot of potential for physicians to bring significant skill and expertise to the table, because again, as I said, we understand that clinical component. We tend to put the patient at the center of everything we do. And then we know how to collaborate and build those teams to help solve some of our issues that we face on a regular basis. I can make quite a case for return on investment in the business case for quality outcomes. That's not oftentimes something you see in a chief operating officer. And I think that's one of the things that a physician brings to the table as well. You know, I think, and I'll be curious to hear what my colleagues say, but, you know, it's interesting when you take a journey and you move into more of a full-time administrative role. I know I stayed board certified and licensed because it's important to me. It's my DNA. I'm never going to give that up, even though I have business training and degrees as well. But I always tell myself every day, I continue to contribute, and I'm hopefully making a difference at a different level. And I'm there to advocate for the patients, but for the physicians and the providers and the clinical care delivery teams, looking for how we do that best given the resources that we have. And I think that's what a physician that's a leader can do very effectively.
Well, that's a good response. And it made me think, all three of our panelists have been physician executives for quite a while. And it's probably fair to say that once you show that you're good and you get on that train, they don't let you off. When you are a physician or a skilled physician and a skilled administrator and executive, it's really helpful to a healthcare entity, and it tends to make you highly valuable and highly coveted as a leader. Dr. Canada, anything you would like to add to that?
Well, sure. I'll just give you a little my background. It's a little bit. Everybody has different paths that they follow. I'm still a clinical nephrologist. I still practice medicine more than what's on paper, but I still practice a lot. And so my journey into administration, I think, started. I joined the faculty. It's been between 20 and almost 20 years ago. And I got interested in, how our billing systems worked, and, it just, would make suggestions. We need to make changes to do it better. And so I ended up being, we had a change in leadership, an interim chief for the division of nephrology. And so I I got my first taste of administration that way. And then soon after, I became, I showed interest to our former CMO, or Chief Medical Officer for, it was called UT Medical Group at the time, University Clinical Health now, in helping him or working with him. And so I took an associate chief medical officer job, again, still practicing, but would assist the chief medical officer in various different things. He ended up retiring after several years, and then I took on the role of chief medical officer. The role within my group, it's approximately, I'll say, 130 physician group. It's a part-time role. I head up sort of the quality initiatives within the organization, and we have several, a lot of it focused on primary care, but it goes throughout the organization, and there's a team of people that help do that. It's not just me. And then along with that, I do lead the clinical part of our division of nephrology. So I sort of kind of decide who's on call, but also the bigger issues of where are we going to grow, what are we going to do. And I had to make the budget work. We had to make ends meet, and we can't spend more than we bring in. So that's a large part of what I do with that.
Well, I want to stick a pin in something very brief that you said around making suggestions, because I think there's going to be a theme in that when we get to a later question. I'm going to stay with you, Dr. Canada, for the next question, because you did bring up finance in your answer. So the name of this group, as Dean mentioned, is Money and Medicine. Can you talk about how important finance is in your current role, and then where you went to get the training and education that you needed in finance to be successful where you are now?
Sure. So it's in my own practice, the small group of nephrologists, it's very important. We have to, we have to pay our physicians and our staff, market wages, or otherwise they leave, and we have high turnover, which costs the organization lots of money. But you can't do that without, the money or, your billings coming in. So you do have to have a good understanding of how that process works, and have goals for your physicians, and they need to understand those goals and how things work. And I try to provide regular feedback to our physicians on how they're doing with their productivity and how we're doing with controlling expenses within our group. For the larger organization, it's very important. If you don't have a bottom line, you can't. I mean, so bottom line, if you don't have a profit, you can't expand and grow and hire new physicians. So where did I get the training? You know, that's an interesting question. I ended up soon after I joined the faculty. I went straight through biology degree in college, med school, fellowship, residency, fellowship. And so I started on the faculty, and I said, well, I love seeing patients. I like teaching, but what, am I going to be, an expert or kind of what's going to be my niche? And so I started in an epidemiology program through UT and thought, well, maybe I could do some, clinical trials with drugs or population-based or data set-based research. Well, I finished the degree, but my career kind of took a different turn in the middle of it. It took me several years, and I ended up taking as an elective, and the program was very flexible, and they let me take healthcare finance classes and healthcare economics. And I ended up just taking accounting 201 or 101 online, just to be able to kind of talk the lingo and understand what was going on in different meetings and understand my own, my own income statement and the balance sheet for the organization. So it's very helpful. Say if your practice wants to, if you're in a larger organization, your practice wants to buy, a big piece of equipment, to understand you're going to capitalize that expense and depreciate it over, years, rather than, just to have that baseline knowledge to be able to talk to your administrators. In my role, I try to bridge that gap between physicians and the administrative group, and try to bring some language that both parties, understand.
Right. Dr. Forbes, how about you? How did you gain some of that financial acumen that you have? I suspect running a private practice might have been a little bit of trial by fire from that standpoint, but I'll let you share that.
Yeah, a little incentive to understand some of that business side by running your own practice and trying to grow it. It's not very fun when you tap into your own home equity line of credit to cover the malpractice bill that came due. But it happens when you do a private practice, and then when you want growth, etc. As I grew that practice, I realized that I learned the techniques of cost accounting, had a software program, I could do my own financial statements, etc. So I gained that expertise, by jumping right into the fire, and that's not atypical of when you have a group practice. It was really when I became involved. I was on the board of the Cleveland Clinic for a while. As I was handed financial statements in my board packets, I had no idea how to really interpret those and what are the indicators I should be looking at if I'm going to contribute significantly to a conversation. And so it was then that I went ahead and sought some formalized education. First became a certified physician executive through the American College of Physician Executives, which is now known as the American Association of Physician Leaders, so APPLE. And that had very rich courses for accounting, for finance management, and that helped me a great deal. In fact, you had to pass those exams to become a certified physician executive. But as my career grew and I had a lot of focus on things such as Brad commented on, understanding, you have an operational budget, a capital budget, you had to plan for those. How do you allocate appropriately? And then going back to the business case for anything that you want to invest in, what does that return on investment look like? I needed some more help with that, clearly. And so I have my master's in healthcare administration, and certainly that helps you understand some of that additional information. Now I have colleagues that don't have the formalized degree and they took to it like a fish to water. I needed that additional assistance so I could be sure. Maybe it's the pedantic undergrad in me that was a chemical engineering major that said, I got to know the numbers, but I really needed to understand the formulas and be able to use them. So important. You can't do anything. I once worked for a sister of St. Francis. She was the head of a board of a big organization, sorry. And that particular sister often said, and Brad alluded to this, no margin, no mission. And so even though we put the patient at the center of everything we do, you still have to count those numbers because you cannot invest into your future without it.
Well, that's good insight, and wouldn't it have been awesome if y'all would have had a money in medicine program when you were medical students?
I'm so jealous. Yes, it's great.
I totally agree. I was going to comment earlier, and it left my mind. I think this group is great. I think it's very, very worthwhile.
Well, thanks again for y'all being here. So, Dr. Forbes, staying with you. So, and Dr. Canada mentioned this earlier, at least when I said stick a pin in it, around making suggestions to administration. But when you decided you wanted to go in administration, what did you do to prepare yourself? And then at some point, you have to let other people know that you're interested. And that's kind of what I was getting at with Dr. Canada's comment, is sometimes when you start making suggestions, you're either a pest or an opportunity to be a new leader is usually how that's interpreted. So what's the story around that for you?
Yeah, and that's such a great question. In fact, I mentor some of those up and coming physician executives, and they'll always ask, how do you get involved? Well, you just hit it, which is, you speak up, you start asking questions, you show interest, you be there. That's one of the best ways to get involved, but sometimes that's still not enough. And I often recommend that you get yourself involved in some formalized groups like this. When you're part of a hospital medical staff, raise your hand when it's time to join the quality committee or some type of committee there. Be present, be involved. Again, the medical associations are a great way to learn the skills and to be relevant and be seen and grow as a leader. You guys are already working on your leadership skills. And, frankly, we all have a leader in us. And your path in the future, you don't know it yet, but there'll be lots of twists and turns to your careers. And you're going to decide what skill set and your talents will take you where with your career. And I think if people really have interest and they want to be involved and engaged, and that's the secret, you want to be engaged, just make your presence known. And then once I did that, I, of course, made sure that I developed some of the skills necessary to effectively communicate. And there's lots of training to do that as well. But I let people know I wasn't shy, and I was always willing to take on an assignment because I learned from it. And then I got to know people. And then the other thing I would say, Clint, I think this is so true. Network. It goes a long way. All those hours where sometimes you're like, I can't go to one more cocktail party. Sometimes you just have to, because that's how you make those connections.
Great point, Sarah, about networking. And that's honestly, it should be the easiest part, but it's one of the hardest parts because, to your point, it's time consuming and
they're tired. You guys get tired. I know.
End of the day. Dr. Canada, how about you?
Well, I agree with Dr. Forbes, is be present, be inquisitive, be involved. I think that's how people, in the ranks above you, they know there's going to be a succession plan, and they know they need people to move into the ranks. And so they're going to look around and say, who would be good for this? And if you're around and present and on committees and speak up, they're going to look at you.
Good points. So we've been dancing all around the topic of communication skills. And y'all have touched on this already. We assume that physicians who communicate well can help bridge that gap between the mindset of a traditional physician and those of a administrator, perhaps without a medical degree. what has worked well for y'all in that area? Dr. Forbes, will go to you first.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And you made me think of something that this is one of those courses I teach at ACPE and ACHE, some of the professional organizations that, some of your leaders attend. And, as a physician, we get a lot of credibility. People assume that we're competent and we know what we're talking about. And so they listen to us. But the other thing is they can also be fearful of us. And one of my biggest pieces of advice for you as you enter, your careers and really think about this, always think about two things. And Dr. Amy Cuddy writes about this. She's written a book called Presence. Make sure that you're approachable. Make sure that you're somebody that listens. Make sure that when you're communicating, it's not only about the words, it's about your body language and how you're being, if you're being receptive to people, etc. So there's some things you've got to know as a leader. You're judged very significantly in the first 90 seconds. And the first thing they're going to think about is, are you warm? Can I trust you? Are you somebody that's approachable? And are you listening to me? And the second thing is the competence. Are you competent? So if you as a physician, they know you're competent. They figured that one out. They want to know that you're listening to them. So one of the best things you can do as a communicator, be open and listen. We can go into all sorts of conversations about what's involved with that, but I have found being a really good listener and hearing people first makes a big difference. Being open and receptive to conversations, whether they're good conversations or potentially challenging conversations. And I think the other thing on the other side of communication, part of my job, I've been the incident commander for COVID for 2 years for the health system. And it's a lot of work. I'm pretty sure no one wants to hear from me anymore because I've communicated and I've communicated and I've communicated, with written communication, email communication, town halls, you name it. We have lots of communication, but I still get stopped in my tracks after we've communicated something 6 times and I get an email saying, I don't quite understand. Did you tell us this? And it's because people have so many other things on their minds. You frankly cannot over communicate, especially if it's something really significant and you need to get that message out there. Be consistent.
Dr. Canada, one thing that you said earlier that kind of, stuck with me is, this question might be a little bit different if you're still actively practicing in a clinical environment. Does that change the response at all? And just any additional comments you have on it?
I do think, when I talk to my colleagues in my group, the fact that I'm still practicing does give me some credibility. Just because I'm down there in the trenches or whatever with them every day. So I think that is, a little something. At some point I'm going to go to a course where Dr. Forbes is teaching and take her communication class, because I will say I've struggled with this and I don't have formal training in communication. I've read some, and certainly I have to practice it all the time on how to best communicate in different situations, whether it's, okay, we've got to talk to our accounting department, about this new initiative and how do we make the financial case, or I've got to talk to the group of physicians about why we need to change certain processes in the clinic, and other things. Sometimes you have to have difficult conversations, and these are typically one-on-one or to just small groups. It's safe. You've got a troubled physician, whether it's behavior with staff or just behavior within the hospital or something. You have to have those difficult conversations, and I agree. I think trying to listen, and see their point of view, and a lot of times there are behavior problems are or a symptom of some other problem going on, and trying to get to the root of whether it's substance abuse or whatever it is. That's certainly on my list of learning more about.
Well, I think, things that were common in both your responses, or what struck to me, was with being relatable in those situations. Whatever part of your background, if you don't have formal training, to your point, Dr. Canada, you've been in the trenches with these folks one way or the other, and that alone is a place to start with relatability. And everyone's going to be a first year administrator at some point if they're a physician and they go that route. And I would think a lot of times for physicians, that training and that experience as a physician is the first place you start to be relatable to people. So I love that. So y'all, we've painted this rosy picture so far of that it's this amazing, fantastic, glamorous world.
Did we say that, Clint? I'm not sure we said that.
Y'all have both smiled a lot while you're talking, so it gives the impression it's this perfect job, and it is a great job. I'm being facetious, but there's got to be some things about it that keep you up at night. So Dr. Canada, can you talk about what those things are, and if you want to put it in the spirit of, if there's something you can snap your fingers and change, either about your job or about healthcare, what would it be?
Well, I was thinking about this. Let me just give you a couple of very challenging situations or eras in my career. One, I was asked by the former dean. There was the chair. Now, I'm a nephrologist, but a chair of another department had left, and they needed an interim chair. And he asked me, can you chair this department until we have somebody permanently? And, and I'm not even in the specialty. I won't go to the details of it, but so that was a very challenging, I had certainly lots of, I may be practicing physician, but I wasn't in the specialty, and there was a lot of internal turmoil within the department anyway. So that was nothing new for the department. So I was just kind of thrown in the turmoil. So we got through it. A new chair was hired, and it was all okay. And I think we kind of did, at least stabilize the ship somewhat. But there were a lot of sleepless nights and hard conversations, and sort of unhappy physicians from the get-go. So that was a little bit of if I had to rewind that, I might have skipped that job. And the other is with my own, I lead the practice group for nephrology, and we just have, we've recently had two of our nephrologists or have decided to one's going into full-time research, and one is rejoining her husband in another city. So we have manpower issues, and how are we going to cover those manpower issues, and have cover our hospitals and that kind of thing. So I sit up at night and think about those things.
Yeah. Dr. Coopwood, welcome. Apologies for any confusion on that link. We talked about competence a little bit earlier, and maybe the person that sent you that link might have lacked a little bit when they sent it. So apologies for that, sir.
I was waiting to be let in for the last 20 minutes, and I said, let me see if another link was sent. And then, so I apologize for being.
Yeah, no worries on that. I will get you caught up here shortly. So we'll go to Dr. Forbes, and Dr. Cooper will let you answer the question after her. But what keeps you up at night as an administrator, Dr. Forbes, and what are those things that you wish you could fix about our healthcare system?
Yeah, well, I wish the list was short. I tend to believe that a couple things bubble to the surface that do truly keep me up at night. And I know Dr. Coopwood would agree with us, but number one for me, some of our staffing issues that we have at Methodist, and we're not alone. It's something, that is certainly facing all institutions across the country. And I bet it's also impacting other countries the same. COVID changed everything for us. You know, people have stepped back and looked at, you know, career paths and what type of professions they want to have, et cetera. And then I think it really magnified, especially our nursing shortages and some of our tech shortages. And it made them very, very desirable in terms of compensation, travel opportunities. And it's become a situation where solving for staffing is a huge issue. You know, when we hit our first year of the pandemic, it was about, okay, reduce volumes, eliminate exposures, try to figure out how to contain this, and then let's return back our volume as carefully as we can. As it progressed into the second year, what we saw instead was, yes, we're going to have to learn to live with this because COVID's here to stay, folks, and we all know that, but not obviously as a pandemic. But that's when the staffing shortages really took hold. And we have done a lot of things to make sure that we have the appropriate level of staffing, and it's truly been a challenge. So if you want to wake me up in the middle of the night, it tends to be that piece of it. I'd also say, and this is probably me, the incident commander of COVID for Methodist, you know, I still think there's a great deal of unpredictability, and we don't know. We even have, you know, our expert as we look at Dr. Fauci, who's saying, wait a second, I'm not going to any big events. COVID's not done with us yet. And I'm watching numbers, seeing things trend back up again. And it's a bit concerning because we got a little bit of relief. We started taking down the masks. We started to feel a little more comfortable gathering. And as we watch the numbers go, will it be another surge? Will it have another impact? Can it affect another aspect of our care delivery systems? Or is it just going to be endemic and we just continue to live with it? I just don't know that answer, but I do worry about that one.
Well, certainly understand that from the COVID perspective. Dr. Coopwood, you've been at this for a while. Maybe it all just kind of rolls off your shoulders now, but are there things that still keep you up at night?
Yeah, and I go back to what was just highlighted by Dr. Forbes. Staffing is a real critical issue that we're all in the healthcare space across this country dealing with. The other piece on the staffing is the cost of labor. You know, pre-pandemic, we were paying nurses $32, $34 an hour. During the height of the probably Omicron pandemic timeframe, the agency nurses were commanding, you know, $150, $180 an hour, and with the expectation that, you know, when COVID went away or the inpatient volume of COVID goes down, we can get back to some normality. And so we're spending, you know, we probably spent 25 million over what we expected to spend on clinical labor. And we're a one hospital system essentially. So when you look at multiple hospital systems across this country, here in the community and across this country, it's multiplied by that. And you know, it affects your finances, it affects your outlooks. It dips into where you're not creating revenue to drop to the bottom line for future investments. And so now that, you know, our inpatient COVID numbers are essentially negligible compared to where they are, we're still paying, you know, nurses anywhere from contract labor, you know, anywhere from $75, $85 an hour. And so you're twice what you went into this budget year for. And if you still have agency in here, they're still over $100 an hour. And so it's not that I don't feel nurses need to be paid appropriately. It's you know, in the healthcare industry, you know, you go to the grocery store and the cost of milk goes up, they pass it right on to the consumer. They raise the price. We can't raise our prices. We can charge more, but we're not going to get paid anymore. Our rates have been previously negotiated. And so we get the squeeze between the high cost of labor, high cost of supplies, high cost of drugs, based on contract rates that we negotiated 2, maybe 3 years ago. And it's unsustainable in the long term if we can't get either relief on the rates or getting the cost of goods and the cost of labor back to some degree of normal. And you'll start seeing it affect hospitals across this country and systems who appear strong. You'll start seeing some of them really struggle. When you look at large systems with large reserves in the bank, those reserves are cash days on hand, and they're there to maintain your bond rating, and they're to maintain your ability to manage your debt. And you start dropping below those numbers, you put the whole system at risk, and you get outside of your bond covenants. And so this is a spiraling thing that can affect, just because we're caught in this squeeze around the cost of supplies, cost of labor, and the absolute inability to raise price. We don't even talk about what the market's doing. In the last 30, 45 days, all of those things, you talk about keeping you up at night, it's keeping you up at night.
Well, I appreciate everybody's perspective on that. We got a couple of other questions left, and I also want to give Dr. Coopwood a chance to maybe touch on some of the other topics we've talked about. Each of you have talked about, or we learned in your bio, how you've balanced your time as an executive versus your time as a physician in clinic. Dr. Forbes, I'll start with you. How did you determine that you would reduce or eliminate those responsibilities? And do you miss that part of the job? Any part of it that's still missing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, as I said, I saw myself as an accidental physician executive. It wasn't the career path I had designed, and was a very, very busy clinician when I was in my practice. I just honestly have seen, the opportunities to move forward with the business side because I was afforded some of those opportunities. And that was a good thing for me. But now through much of my early career, and I've been a physician executive well into the early years of my practice, because I was chair of a department and I was a medical director, et cetera, and I ran the practice. I obviously was still a very busy clinician. As I moved into other roles like, COOs and CMOs of systems and chief clinical officers, and even in this role, your ability as a primary care physician outside of urgent care to have a continuity of care practice is extremely limited. And frankly, some of those positions tell you explicitly they don't want you to practice because you have to dedicate your time. And I know that I've had colleagues over the years say to me, wait a second, isn't it easier when you go into administration? I'm waiting for Dr. Coopwood to laugh over there, because no, it's not any easier. There's still long days, long hours. However, what's really important to me is something Brad said early on, and that's that street cred, that credibility that you have as a physician. And I think that's what distinguishes us as physician executives, and why we proudly say that, because being a physician, we went through a lot of work to get where we are today, and it's in our DNA. It's changed as a result of our training and experiences taking care of patients. We bring something different to the table, but I stay licensed, I stay board certified, just took my research yet again, and it's a lot of work. I get it, especially if I'm not taking care of patients every single day in the capacity where a typical primary care doctor might see those disease states on a daily basis. I've got to work a little harder to remember those things. What I do, though, is I have done part-time practice and in some of my roles, And you guys, if y'all laugh at me, I'm just going to be so embarrassed. But one of the things that I keep doing is I do some of the telemedicine services as acute care telemedicine. I do it periodically just to stay in contact with that patient care. And I love it because I remember the days of seeing those 20, 30, whatever patients showed up in your office to be seen. There's something immediately rewarding about taking care of patients. Every single encounter has its opportunity to feel rewarded. Do not go into administration if you're waiting for that kind of feedback and that kind of great job, because that's not what these jobs are all about. But there's something very special about a physician-patient relationship that I would miss if I didn't do any of it.
That's great. Dr. Canada, you're still, like you said earlier, a little bit still in the clinical world, but you obviously maybe not as much in the beginning. So what does that look like for you?
So yeah, I still practice a good bit, and I would say that's my daily challenge is how do I make it work? It's either maybe a half day where I have meetings and whatever, and then I have to go around in the hospital, and then I will say if I've gotten, well, I need to review this contract or something, that all comes home and I do it at night or on Saturday. So I agree with Dr. Forbes, just because you're doing some administration does not mean it's going to be easier. I think a lot of my administrative time comes on, Saturday morning. I just pull up the email and everything that I have not addressed gets read and answered, and because I was, seeing patients on Friday afternoon.
So Dr. Coopwood, I'm going to ask you to answer it as well. And we talked a little bit about our backgrounds earlier and about how the different roles that we've that each of you have had. I was hoping you kind of weave that a little bit into your answer, as well as talk about the positions that you have had and weave that into when and how you might have reduced or eliminated those clinical responsibilities. Oh, you're on mute, Dr. Coopwood. Sorry about that.
Thanks for the invitation, and apologize again for my delay getting on. I was an active practicing general surgeon in Nashville, Tennessee. General surgery is what I wanted to do. I had a great dislike for administrators because they made you do your charts, and they made you do all the stuff that you didn't want to do as a clinician. And so I had no real desire. I had a life-changing experience. I wouldn't wish on anyone, but I lost my wife and had 3 young boys, and was kind of faced with, what do I do now? And the opportunity in 2000 came to become chief medical officer at the hospital in Nashville General Hospital. And it allowed me to continue to do surgery. I was able to do the Vanderbilt residents rotated through the surgery residents rotated through the hospital. I was able to still do surgery and do the administrative things. It was tough, but I wasn't really ready to give up my surgery because I loved it. But after 5 years, my predecessor, she retired, and they offered me the job to be chief executive officer of that same hospital. And I thought I would still try to do some little clinical and surgery. Surgery is a little different than, seeing patients, in that your clinical skills, your hand-eye coordination, if you don't keep it up, you not that you lose it, but you lose that confidence necessarily, and you lose it quicker than you really want to believe that you can. And so that 1 year just didn't go well, and I said, okay, I'm gonna have a bad experience and lose both jobs. So I was at a point of decision as to whether I'm gonna no longer be a surgeon, am I gonna be administrator, or what am I gonna do? So I chose the administration mainly because it allowed me to touch more people on a broader base than I could one at a time as a general surgeon. I haven't ever regretted that decision. I do miss the OR. I don't hang out in the operating room at my hospital. And so it's really been over 20 years. It's been probably 17, almost 18 years since I've asked for a scalpel. And, you know, if you ask me what I do, the first thing still comes out of my mouth, I'm a surgeon, or a recovering surgeon, or something like that. And so it's that part you never really give up. But I could not be a CEO and still practice surgery. I applaud internists and primary care and others that can still have a clinical patient interaction, doesn't require invasive skills, because it does keep you nearby. It does. So I haven't completely lost my street cred as a doctor. I don't know why no one here in Memphis ever see me operate, but for some reason I still get credit for having been a doctor at one, or practicing physician at one point. And so it's from my perspective of the current job I had and the specialty of what I was in, I could not do them both. I definitely couldn't do surgery safely, and I couldn't, you know, miss meetings because a patient took a bad turn in the ICU. Then you can't do your job that you're paid to do well. So that's kind of how I got to this role, and I've enjoyed it. It's been rewarding. Been in Memphis 12 years, and I was CEO in Nashville for 5, and so it's kind of my story, how I got here. And I forgive my former self for hating administrators, because we still got to do what we have to do in order to make budgets work and capital decisions and all of that kind of thing, and do charts.
So we touched on this with the other folks earlier. I wanted to see if I could get another quick response from you, because you kind of touched on it. You went from CMO to CEO. At some point along the way, you had to get some kind of financial training and education. Where did you go to get that?
Well, it's interesting. I in undergrad, I was on the typical biology major, chemistry minor track, and I ran into a class called physical chemistry, and my sisters preceded me in school, and they struggled, and I felt they were the smartest people that I knew, and they struggled in physical chemistry. And I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna let this one class ruin my whole chances in order to get this degree. So I changed probably sophomore, early junior, to get a Bachelor of General Studies degree. I got in chemistry and business administration. So I got the basics in finance and business. Those last couple of years, I still got my prerequisites for medical school, and I got around physical chemistry. I don't know if either one of you all ended up taking that class, but I sure didn't want to take it from at least the professor that was teaching it where I was. But it was serendipitous that was the foundation of my financial understanding and background. But serving as chief medical officer, where you're not in that big chair, but you're intimately involved in understanding what drives the finances, also was a good 5-year primer to be able to talk in a language that your CFO understands and that your operators understand. So that's kind of where I got to, but I don't have an MBA. I think an MBA is
All right, I think we might have lost him. Dean, I think we still have a little bit of time. Did you want to open it up? Those are my prepared questions. Did you want to open it up and see if other folks wanted to ask any?
Yeah, I'd like to open it up for questions. So if anyone has any, just put it in the chat, or feel free to come on and ask some questions.
Hi there. Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right, great. I guess, I just kind of wanted to ask, as someone who's not necessarily interested in an administrative role, but, I guess I wanted to ask, what should we be educating ourselves on as future physicians and eventually practicing physicians in order to effectively communicate with folks in administrative roles, to one, understand the language and understand the motivations and what's going on behind the scenes so that we can, I guess, work together for, the best outcomes and everything that we all want. What should we be learning right now? Because we don't have, a curriculum that actually teaches about the business and administrative side of medicine, but it's obviously an important part of the day-to-day component of being a physician.
I'll try to answer quickly. You're absolutely right. You don't learn. I learned this when I was a practicing physician. If I had a patient in the hospital for, you name it, some ailment, but they needed a colonoscopy, I'd call the GI doc. Can you come and scope them before they go home? It made sense to me. It made sense I was doing it for the convenience of the patient, but I had no idea of the economics of that decision on the healthcare system, because the hospital doesn't get another dime for that colonoscopy because it's an outpatient procedure. And so there's a disconnect between what a physician knows and understands. I was doing this to patients here, we might as well get a colonoscopy. Well, from a hospital administrator standpoint, that's the last thing you want to do, because you want to send them back through on the outpatient side. Same thing with length of stay, is understanding the importance of length of stay and how hospitals are paid. The doctor gets a check for the procedure, the hospital gets a check for the DRG, and it gets $5,000 if you keep the patient in the hospital 2 days or 20 days. And the hospital's motivation is to get that patient out as soon as possible. And sometimes that is counter to what the doctor wants to do. And you need to understand what's driving administration. The patient out too quick. Well, it's two different reasons around the payment structure that motivate in the entities differently. And so understanding that helps to find that sweet spot to be able to manage that process better.
And Cameron, I'm happy to jump in here as well. I'm going to take a slightly different tact. I really appreciate Dr. Coopwood's response. I'm thinking one of your questions was how to make it your most effective version of you as you're a practicing physician, as you're a physician seeing patients on a regular basis, whether or not you get involved in administration or not. Some of the things we already touched on, really mastering some of those communication skills, huge, down to how people are perceiving you, how you're communicating. It will not only help you with your career and interacting with your colleagues, sharing messages, interacting with a greater care delivery team, it's going to help you feel more rewarded when you interact with your patients as well. I touched on that other topic about, know yourself well enough in terms of how you're being viewed. Again, it's a great thing to be a physician, because even Dr. Coopwood said this, that, people still give him credit as a physician. He's always going to be a physician. So there's an assumed competence there. Really pay attention to how you're being receptive with others, and think about that warmth versus competence piece as you grow and develop as a practicing physician and perhaps a leader of tomorrow. I think on a regular basis, and to some of Dr. Coopwood's points, be relevant, be in the conversation, get involved, talk about issues. If you don't know about it, don't be afraid to ask. Take a stand on things and get involved. And as you become members of medical staffs, part of your residency training, etc., you're going to want to participate and be part of it. And then just as you grow in your career, we talked about this one already, network, get to know your peers. And you guys are good at this. You're already part of this group. Continue to do that. That's going to be really important in the future.
So Rohan has a quick question. He asked, what steps can we take to enter hospital administration straight out of residency? Yeah, I think he already has an MBA, so he's wondering how he can get involved as quickly as possible.
I'm so happy to jump in here if you guys don't mind, to my colleagues here. I have to tell you, I have a son that's an MD MBA, and we've had this battle many times about, what hat are you going to wear? I have this bias, and I really think, make sure you get some clinical tread wear on those tires. Make sure it goes back to the street cred. It goes back to people want to know that you understand as a physician leader what it means to be practicing day to day. So there is some value to that piece. But I have many colleagues I know that have not practiced medicine once they were done with their residency, and that's okay. Again, be current. But one of the things that you can do as you have your degree and you get out of residency, we've talked about some of those things. Raise your hand, get involved, join some of the professional organizations as well that are focused on people that are healthcare administrators. American College of Healthcare Executives, great group to learn from and hang out with. They've got job posts. They've got people looking for folks that maybe want a residency or intern type of position that's more business related. Even the American College of Physician Executives, which is now Apple, same thing. They've got lots of opportunities, and that really is very much targeted to the physician who happens to be a business leader as well.
One thing that I'll just throw in that is sort of an answer to both those questions. Cameron, really from the practicing non-administrative physician side, I work with physicians of all shapes, sizes, specialties, and all of that. And the communication challenges, such as the ones we've already touched on, are really challenging. And what I see that's very common, and it's granular, but it's important, is when someone moves, when someone is new to the organization, when someone even gets promoted into the organization, there's a variety of things that have impacted that. There could be baggage from the person in the previous role. It could just be that we've brought in someone from out of town to come in this role, that they're not one of us, language and kind of backroom comments like that, and being above and around all of that. And to Dr. Forbes' point, stepping up and being proactive, being welcoming. There's a lot of, even when it's not gossipy, dramatic friction type of stuff, there's just a communication gap sometimes. If you move here from Baltimore, or you move here from California, and you don't know what it's like to practice or run a hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. I mean, being empathetic towards all that to people that are moving to this community it's a big source of miscommunication, in my opinion, is the lack of that sometimes. So that's just something I see from my angle.
So one question I had, so are there, any specialties that tend to go into administration, or does it matter what specialty you are? Or kind of curious about that.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'll just have a short comment. And I was thinking about this. In different specialties, I think your opportunity for roles are different, depending on, some specialties don't even deal with hospitals that much. So like if you're wanting to be a hospital CMO, like dermatologists don't go to the hospital a lot. But there are areas, say that if you're into some areas of administration, say like if you're a surgeon, or being the CMO of an outpatient surgery center, or say in my field, nephrology, we have medical directors of different dialysis units. So I think some specialties will certainly be involved with hospital systems more. There will be other specialties Well, I think your administrative roles would be different, but I think they're there.
Yeah, and I would just add to Dr. Canada's comments that, you know, it used to be that there were certain specialties you saw a lot of at some of the professional venues for physician leaders, physician executives. It's all over though. I mean, it's really focusing on what your leadership strengths are, what really makes you happy. You guys commented that, you know, Brad and I were both smiling through our conversations. You know, I love what I do. I mean, not that every day is easy. I love what I do though. And it's been a blessing to have, you know, opportunities such as I've had. And I think that's part of it. People find what really gives them joy and they feel like they make their greatest contribution. So I don't think it's specialty specific. I think it's really that person specific and their passion for something. And then they'll learn the necessary skills and really grow and develop with that.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is you got to have the personality no matter what specialty you're in, because I think the biggest thing that we have in order to be successful in these roles is leadership skills, and leadership skills really are driven by people willing to follow you. So I can think I'm the world's best leader, but I can't get anyone to follow me properly. Probably I'm not a good leader. And so a lot of times physicians, we have a innate confidence because of our education, because of our experiences, and that a lot of times transfers into being that leader that people want to listen to and people want to follow. And so I don't think that's specialty specific, but you do have to have that little bit of aura that people want to follow you with. And that's, you can't put your finger on that. You really can't train for that. If you have it, you have it. And it's obvious in the way, you know, you were a chief resident in your residency and you were able to accomplish things as chief resident, or you some other kind of social area where you were able to bubble up to see where you were leading an organization. And those things are, you don't learn in B school, you don't learn in medical school. It's part of your personality. And if you have it, and you have the medical degree and the education experience, you can leverage that a lot of times to get where you want to go.
All right, does anybody else have questions?
I just have one last question. My Wi-Fi is being in and out, or else I turn my video on. I apologize. But I am an HPSB scholarship recipient, and I'm going through the Air Force. And one of our job roles is kind of to act in that CMO, CEO position, where we also do the finances as well as, you know, the direction of the medical corps. Do you have any advice for HPSB students and what we can do now to kind of start thinking the same way without that experience?
You're making us all think. That's why we're all still on mute. But it's a great question. I'm just trying to understand. So you're required to have an understanding of some of those functions like CMOs, et cetera. Can you just clarify that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a strange position in the fact that so you'll go into your residency and your job as an attending with also the jobs of a general officer, which means that in the medical corps, you're in charge of the finances for, you know, whatever your group needs to buy, as well as like the logistics of where the company's going and what improvements they need to make.
All right, so now I understand. Thank you. So I don't know if either of my colleagues are expert in that area, but you're right. There is a special set of responsibilities that fall on the shoulders of folks in your situation. And there's not necessarily formalized training that you get throughout your educational journey unless you seek it outside. And I love something Dr. Canada said early on. He sought courses online too, to see if he could learn some of the information around the finance management, et cetera. So that might be one of your opportunities. I also think there's, I know many of the organizations like the Apple, the American College of Physician Executives, that organization, you can be a student, you can be a resident, you can take their courses, and their courses are also done remotely as well as live. So you have that opportunity. But I think there's some add-on skills, and let's not forget the very basic way we all learn. We tap somebody with expertise on the shoulder and say, hey, can you show me this? Show me how to do this. Can you give me some of your secrets, your inside, the secret sauce, whatever it is? But that may be one way that you could do it as well. But I'd probably encourage you to look around and just see if there's some courses or some things that you could learn that could distinctly help you with those kinds of responsibilities. And finally, I really commend you for thinking about it in advance and thinking about how can I best prepare for this.
I would say to that also, and we're throwing out a lot of organization acronyms tonight, but local, state, and national MGMA and American College of Healthcare Executive chapters are going to provide some of that business training or business acumen that you need in those roles. Their student membership path is a little bit different. That's actually something I might be able to help you with offline. And the other thing I would say is, that's a great opportunity for this group. I mean, some of the things that you're going to experience earlier, perhaps, than everyone else in this organization, it might be a great way to kind of guide the programming a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Is there anyone else that has questions? Okay, well, Dr. Forbes, Dr. Canada, Dr. Coopwood, I would just like to thank you guys again for coming tonight and speaking with our class. I know they're really excited to hear what you guys had to say. And thank you, Clint, for hosting. So yeah, thank you guys. So
Yeah, enjoyed it. Good luck to you guys.
Very much. Good luck. Thank you.
We'll share the recording out as well. Thank you all, everybody.
Thank y'all.
Good night.
Bye now.
Good night.